am going to read Chapter 8 in The Treasure of Pelican Cove. The Shack on Heron Creek. Now that does it. Granny's eyes snapped with anger. Taking someone's pet. I've known Jake Lester's ma for nearly 15 years. If anyone can get to the bottom of this, she can. Come on, we'll pay her a friendly visit. Hiram's pickup crunched back down the shell road. Granny and Hiram sat in the front. Paul, Elizabeth Ann, and Jimmy sat in the back of the truck, braced against the cab. Don't worry, Jimmy, Elizabeth Ann said. We'll find 'em. Jimmy scrubbed hard at his still wet face. Yeah, Granny'll get 'em back. The pickup turned onto the beach road. Jimmy was quiet the rest of the way to Frenchman's Inlet. He watched the trees and shrubs slide past on the left side of the truck. He didn't want to look down the beach where Blackie should have been. Hiram turned down a dirt road and eased the truck up to a small house near the water. Mrs. Lester was sitting on the porch. She was rocking and fanning herself. She got up and waited for them to approach. Come, sit a spell, she said cheerfully. I've been hoping for a bit of company. Rest yourselves. Granny took the rocker next to her. Hiram sat on the porch rail. The children lined themselves up on the front steps. They waited expectantly for Granny to ask about Blackie. Instead, Granny mentioned the storm. The two women fell into a discussion about the weather. The children stared in amazement. They wiggled on the hard steps. Hiram glanced down at them, eyes twinkling. A slight shake of his head was enough to stop Elizabeth Ann and Paul, but not Jimmy. Each of the children was introduced in turn. Granny left Jimmy for last. Mrs. Lester looked him over with shrewd eyes. This one seems to have a problem, she said. Has the look of my Jake when things don't go his way. Maybe, Granny said easily. She led the conversation away from Jimmy to the treasure hunters on the beach. Red swept into Jimmy's face. He unclenched his fists and tried to sit still. Jake, he thought to himself, I don't look like Jake Lester. I hear your dog found an emerald, Mrs. Lester said. Jake was telling me about it the other night. He took quite a liking to that dog. I'll bet, Jimmy muttered. Elizabeth Ann gave him a sharp nudge. Jimmy fell silent. I thought maybe he did, Granny said, and we wanted to get his help. The silly dog's off somewhere and we can't find him. Do you think Jimmy could help? Jimmy felt his jaw drop open. He blinked. Granny was asking Jake to help find Blackie. If anybody can, it'll be my Jake, Mrs. Lester said. He's a mite rough-mannered and all, but he loves animals. He'd not hurt a wee thing. She got up and headed for the open door. He'll be home in a few minutes. You just sit right there and don't stir yourselves. I'll get you some of my banana nut bread, fresh baked this morning. Jimmy was still licking crumbs and melted butter off his fingers when he looked up and saw Jake. The big man was striding up the path to the house. Jimmy froze. The plate slid out from his lap. It landed on the grass with a dull thud. "Here he is now," Mrs. Lester said. "These folks came to see you, Jake." Jake took off his hat when he saw Granny. "Ma'am," he nodded to the others, "what can I do you for?" He stopped in front of Jimmy. The boy found himself staring at muddy boots and a length of faded denim. He started to rise. A swift punch from Elizabeth kept him rooted to the steps. "These folks lost a dog," Mrs. Lester said. "They were hoping you might help them find him." Jake Lester glanced down at Jimmy. "You mean that old black dog? The one that found Pegleg's treasure?" Jimmy nodded. He shrank back as the man knelt in front of him. "Hey, son," Jake said, "I lost a dog once. Roughest time I ever went through. Sure, I'll help you find your dog." "But I thought you took him," Jimmy blurted out. Jake looked surprised. Then he laughed, a big laugh that began deep in his chest. When he finished, his face was redder than ever. "I guess I did spout off a bit the other day," he said, "but it's not in my nature to hurt a dog." "Not Jake," his mother agreed. "He'll find your dog for you, son." "Maybe sooner than you think," Jake said thoughtfully. "I've got a good idea where to look. You folks can follow me in your truck." A few minutes later, the two pickup trucks were bouncing along the river road. About 5 miles out, they came to a weather-beaten old house. Jake pulled into the yard. Hiram stopped behind him. The sound of the truck started a frenzy of barking. Jimmy looked around eagerly, but he couldn't see any dogs. He leapt over the side and started toward the sound. Jake walked back to the truck. He stopped Jimmy. "Wait here," he said. Granny told Jimmy to get back into the truck. Jimmy obeyed reluctantly. Then all 3 children stood up so that they could see over the cab of the truck. They watched as Jake strode up to the sagging porch. The door opened and a man stepped out. Hey, Jimmy whispered. "It's the man who chased Blackie." The stringy-haired man glanced toward the truck. His dark eyes narrowed. He looked back at Jake and leaned against a crooked porch post. The children couldn't hear what Jake said. They didn't have to. They could tell from the way he moved that he was angry. The other man answered him sullenly. They talked for a few minutes. Then they went around the side of the house. The barking quieted and then became louder. Jimmy held his breath. Suddenly, Blackie came charging around the building. Jimmy met him halfway. The others piled out of the truck. They hurried to pet Blackie. The dog frisked around happily. Jake and the other man came back around the building and up onto the rickety porch. After Jake said something else to him, the man stomped through the doorway, kicking the door shut behind him. Jake left the porch and hurried down to join the others. "The dog's been well cared for," he said, "and I fired Bill. I hired him off the mainland when I was short-handed. Should have known better, but if you want to press charges..." Granny shook her head. No, she said firmly. She shook Jake's hand. "We got what we came for. Thanks, Jake." "You're welcome, ma'am," Jake said gruffly. Now, maybe you ought to get going. Bill's just squatting on this property. He'll be lighting out now. Hiram hustled them into the truck and backed out. All the way home, the children sang at the top of their lungs. When they reached Land's End, Jimmy stopped beside Granny. "Thanks, Granny," he said. "You were great." Her eyes twinkled. "Well, I guess I did keep you from accusing someone wrongly. It's best not to be hasty." Jimmy gave her an embarrassed look. "Yes, ma'am. I'll get the facts first next time. Just remember, the folks on this island may have a touch of treasure fever." "But they are still our friends," Granny said. "Treat them as such. The fever will go. The friends will remain." Then it's all right to go back to our search?" Elizabeth Ann asked. "Fine, but," Granny hesitated, "it won't hurt to take precautions. I trust our friends. I don't trust any man who would take a dog."